The Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for another episode of KineScope. This is episode 5. We're very excited today because we're going to be looking at the many roles of James Dean on television. In fact, Dean actually made more teleplays than he did films. He only made 4 films before he was killed tragically by his own hand at the car crash back in the 50s.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. I mean, he was driving the car. Yeah, but wait, was it 4 movies? I thought it was only 3 movies. Rebel Without a Cause, Giant, and East of Eden, right?
Well, maybe it is only 3.
And yeah,
and the Cannonball Run 2.
Yes, Cannonball Run 2, exactly. But that's a little bit in dispute whether he was really in that or not.
Gabe Hardman, John Suntress here
yes.
to talk about a couple really interesting teleplays from 1953. This is the earliest we've gone so far in KineScope, and I even actually managed to upload the opening credits for both shows. We're going to be talking about Danger and Tales of Tomorrow, both from 1953, and I've got. Honestly, I kind of want to start with Tales of Tomorrow.
Okay, sure.
Because it's such a brief role.
Yeah.
For Dean, but it's a star-studded cast. So here's the opening, everybody. And shame on me, I didn't do my due diligence as far as, was it on ABC? Was it on NBC? Was it on CBS?
Tales of Tomorrow. Oh, jeez. Maybe I don't have Tales of Tomorrow in front of me, but
hang on. Let's watch because I love this opening credits. Here we go.
Yeah.
Tales of Tomorrow. Presented by Chrysler, name that makes news in watch fans. How would you explain a sudden, overpowering, unnatural urge to destroy everything you love? Learn the answer tonight when Tales of Tomorrow presents The Evil Within, starring Margaret Phillips. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It's ABC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in a lot of ways, at least the ones I've seen, not a terribly distinguished show. But but I think that this one, this particular one, The Evil Within, is kind of interesting. In that Rod Steiger is actually the male lead in the show. He's and it's a pretty early performance, pretty early TV performance even for Rod Steiger. He's and if you know Rod Steiger at all, you know that he goes big, right? And but a lot of what I read about his, I think he was also somewhat of a nervous actor, look, insecure, as many people, creative people are. But like he would, have huge anxiety problems over these live TV things, and his performance in this. I mean, later, he's in basically one of the most distinguished, live TV plays, Marty. And yet here he is certainly like, it feels like he read the sides that morning, and it's just everything he says. The emphasis is on something weird. He doesn't it doesn't really feel like he and the actress who plays his wife, if we have that in front of us,
Margaret. Hold on.
Like they're really interacting. I mean, this is kind of like, this is not a great episode, but it is also kind of interesting to see, these performers that, early days of television, trying to figure it out. Apparently, and James Dean is in this episode, but he plays a pretty minor role as the sort of lab assistant to Rod Steiger.
Right.
To sum this thing up, it's basically like Steiger plays a scientist who creates a formula that unleashes the beast within people, or at least the beast within monkeys initially, and he brings it home, and he brings home the samples of the formula that he's concocted. He has not figured out an antidote for it yet, and he's like, "Hey, I got to just store these in the fridge at home, right?" Which doesn't seem to be a problem for his wife, except for the part where one of the vials leaks into a pie, which his wife eats, and then she starts turning evil. And but even the way that she's evil is a little bit vague. She turns into sort of mustache twirling, so to speak, performance, but it's all pretty dubious.
Well, she starts off kind of almost drunk and, feeling a little carefree, and, I guess does a 1953 censor-approved bit of sexy dancing.
Yes.
Kind of primping herself and everything. And then, she dumps the formula. She burns her husband's papers and cackles mercifully. And
and starts, lies to him about, what happened to the papers. Lies to him about a phone call with the James Dean assistant character, which I'm still not entirely clear what the point of that was. So Steiger and Dean were friends, though, and they were friends before this. They'd they hung out together in New York some, and at least from what I've read. So I don't know if one or the other one of them was responsible for getting this role, but at the time, Dean was, he'd only come to New York in 1951. He was, he had come to try to get into the actor's studio, which eventually he did by putting together a scene with a fellow actor, and they, which was very well received by, Kazan and Strasberg. But when it came to actually doing the work and and showing up and participating in classes and stuff, Dean barely did it. He put together some sort of a bullfighter monologue that because each class you're supposed to bring material to and perform it in front of the class, and and be criticized by Strasberg, right? So he did. Strasberg tore him apart, and he basically just never showed up and did another thing again. So as much as we all think about Dean as part of that actor studio crowd, he apparently didn't do a hell of a lot when it came to actually studying. And all of the things that I've read are about how incredibly undisciplined he was. Undisciplined in the, in these live, he did several of these live TV appearances, but he would always just mumble his way through rehearsals, not commit to things. He got a reputation for being difficult, but then he'd always deliver when, in the real performance. Right. So, and there's, in this particular episode, there's not a lot of him to talk about. But he does give a very naturalistic little performance, and in the little scene that he's in. Sure. Certainly more so than Steiger, who is just feels like he's either totally lost or bouncing off the walls, but like from moment to moment.
Well, Margaret Phillips is the actress. And she does carry most of the drama, is giving probably the fullest effort. It's a paper thin story. But again, it's this series, and you've seen the comments that I've been putting at the bottom of the screen as people kind of read about it and stuff. Tales of Tomorrow is this really weird show because it was just live. We're going to probably examine at least one other episode before we're through. But Paul Newman is in one that where the Earth is freezing, and he's got a total bit role. So, I mean, that's the thing. This is really, especially given how early this is in television history, a lot of first roles for a lot of people, or early roles.
And I think it wasn't as distinguished a show as some other things. And I mean, it's something where people would, where you could get a shot, absolutely. It's certainly, compared to other things that we've watched, certainly compared to something like The Comedian, this is very shot in a very prosaic way. It's not, there's nothing flashy or stylish about it. It's, they're just cranking them out. The guy who directed it, Don Medford,
I know that name.
Yeah, he went on to direct tons of shit. Like his last credit is 1989. He directed, Dynasty and like a lot of nighttime soaps in the 80s, and was he had a long career. He's not one of these guys that rose up to features like Lumet and Frankenheimer and all those people, but he is somebody who consistently worked and and did good work. The guy who at least co-wrote this though, David Durston. Like his other credits are kind of amazing. Like he wrote something called The Love Statue, which is some kind of LSD exploitation movie. But he wrote and directed I Drink Your Blood. Look, you can't deny that. Like he lives on in history through that.
That's awesome. I didn't make the connection. That's wonderful. Like you said, I mean, these were kind of the there's the high quality of Studio One and Playhouse 90 and things like that. These were the everyday shows, but that's why they're interesting. And it goes for Danger. In fact, when we get to Danger, but these were the quick little half-hour shows that were on, and also again, I mean, because it was live, you had no choice. You had to make something to fill a half hour.
And they weren't spending 2 weeks rehearsing it and blocking every camera move and everything like that. I mean, it is interesting to watch stuff that is, a little more programmery or whatever. That's just a something that isn't part of this kind of classic canon of whatever. But also with actors who did become huge, important actors, right? But but we're seeing them in this less than ideal circumstance where they're struggling through a not very good script and obviously with very little time to rehearse it.
And it took decades for ABC to truly compete with CBS and NBC. And, in the radio days, NBC had two networks. That's why their logo for a time was an N that was red and blue. And ABC was the blue network, and the government forced them to get rid of the blue network and let it become independent. It referred to itself as the Blue Network for a very long time, and then finally in the early 50s became the American Broadcasting Company. But they were always third place. It doesn't surprise me in terms of the level of production. And man, this shows you how cheap it was to be able to sponsor a television show the sponsor is Chrysler, not the cars, the watch bands, not the watches,
the
watch bands,
just the bands. And like they make a big giant point of not only showing off the watch bands but illustrating it by saying, doesn't this painting of the Blue Boy look awfully drab with this simple frame around it? But if we put this wildly ornate frame around it, it complements it, right? So you're supposed to this adjustable watch band is supposed to be the frame around your work of art that is a watch.
Elgin, Illinois was a center of watchmaking in the United States for a very long time, and they were also known, but they actually made watches.
Right? Yeah. Complete. Tell me what town was the center for watch band making?
I understand exactly. I believe that was Muncie, Indiana.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
But
No, that's awesome, and then the amount of attention in the episode that is spent, and I mean, the sponsor, of course it is, but yeah, it had to be very cheap. So, that's funny. William watched and said the watch commercials were hypnotizing.
I don't know that there's tons more to say about this. I mean, I'm sure that we'll talk more about Tales of Tomorrow, sci-fi-ish anthology thing. And I believe there's a sort of notorious episode with Lon Chaney Jr. playing Frankenstein where he just destroys the set or something like that, or is that in danger?
Yeah, that was a different show. I believe that was Matinee Theater.
Okay.
It was the first color show that was on NBC. And yeah, we may as well finish the story. But yeah, I mean, apparently Junior was going to play the monster, and they were running him through the paces of the blocking. And they're like, now look, Lon, this stuff is like, all this equipment is, cardboard and balsa wood. So don't, destroy it during the rehearsals and stuff. And he said, all right, I'm going to get up from the table and I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go like this. And then he's just kind of pantomiming over the equipment.
Yeah.
And then when it came time for the day of the shoot, apparently a couple early hours before the shoot, Chaney got drunk, and so drunk he fell asleep on the table. So when he was supposed to come off the table and be alive as the monster, he was kind of still in a stupor, and he thought it was still rehearsal. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go like this. On live TV. And that's awesome. So, but unfortunately, it happened on Tales of Tomorrow. But there are really interesting episodes with a lot of, again, the people I'm reasonably certain, because I worked at Blockbuster and we had the video cassettes of the show, and I do remember seeing them literally 35 years ago. Sure. And it was, stuff like I want to say Lee Marvin might have been in one, or Bronson was very likely in one. I'm gonna have to go through. But we might want to come back a couple times for comic relief too.
We certainly need to. If Lee Marvin is in anything, we need a Lee Marvin episode.
That'd be good. I completely agree. So anyway, on to our second show, and once again, I've got the opening. Danger. Unfortunately, this episode was not directed by Sidney Lumet, but he was a regular director of Danger before he graduated to the better anthology shows.
Yeah.
So from CBS in 1953, the opening to Danger.
Now for a tale of danger. Presented by Amadent. Amadent has anti-enzyme action.
Now I went beyond the just the title credit for a couple reasons. I like the jostle of the camera, as that obviously was a live mistake.
Yeah.
But also some of the credits. William Dozier was the executive producer.
Yeah, as we would know from the Batman TV show from the 60s, or at least that.
And also a lot of the action, again, ABC. In this case, a lot of the action dramas of the early 60s, like 77 Sunset Strip, Riverside 6, those were William Dozier shows. So he really became a very great action drama producer.
Sure,
And,
sure.
And Betsy Palmer, and of course James Dean. And Betsy Palmer, I'm a massive fan. This is like a year or two before her in Mr. Roberts.
Yes,
one of her film roles. And I like the story that happens too in this. And I've already forgotten the old man's name.
It's Walter Hampton. But story wise, it's Betsy Palmer plays a fashion model who moves into this rooming house. Walter Hampton is the elderly superintendent who's being evicted, but he doesn't know it because his sort of ne'er-do-well younger assistant played by JB, played by James Dean, doesn't give him the telegram or something, so he doesn't quite realize, and James Dean's supposed to take over as a superintendent, but then he is troubled, and gets into a thing where he kind of tries to force himself on Betsy Palmer. She spurns him, and so he gets all murderous, like he sets out to kill her by
asphyxiation. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, with the turning on the gas in her apartment, it's it actually is pretty good. I mean, this was certainly relative to Tales of Tomorrow. I mean, this is the ending is a little bit easy, but but overall, Dean gives a really good performance in it. He goes he gets a little much at times, but this is him in basically the majority of the roles that he had in live TV were these kind of troubled young men or delinquent types or kind of psychos, right? That was a lot of what he played. There's a different episode of Danger where he also plays another psycho type character that I watched.
Was that Padlocks?
Padlocks, yeah. And which is interesting too. That's something that definitely worth checking out and tracking down. I thought that was actually a pretty good show.
You are seeing the seeds of Rebel Without a Cause.
Absolutely. Certainly, his approach to the performances and his sort of undisciplined charisma, which is kind of what people like about him. He was able to just bring this level of, and we're seeing it here though. It's not like this is a James Dean that you wouldn't recognize, as the guy from those movies. He's giving that kind of performance here. He's, he in a lot of ways, he kind of was fully formed, or at least as fully formed as he ever got, considering how young he died. It seems like going to this, it would be that he's really trying to figure it out or whatever, and and he's relatively untrained, but he really reads in this, right? Like he really comes across. It feels like he's the James Dean who we know. And I mean, apparently, even at the time, like people started noticing him on these TV shows, and and recognize him on the street, and he gained some level of popularity just from this TV work that kind of ended up leading into the features.
Well, again, he's one of these guys that has, much like young Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor, you can't take your eyes off that face. Look at that.
Yeah. And he's a good looking guy, and you can't deny how charismatic he is on screen. Absolutely. Right. I mean, and I'm not even the hugest James Dean fan in the world. Like, I mean, I like Rebel Without a Cause. Nicholas Ray movie, and, and East of Eden is a great movie. Giant, and is giant, and which is it's a big good movie, epic type of movie.
Is it Douglas Sirk? Is Giant Douglas Sirk?
No, it's George Stevens, I believe.
Oh, that's okay. Yes.
And
Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think that but it is impressive to see him work at this point, right? And see that, and especially just in reading up on his, I'm not a James Dean expert over here, but just in reading up on his time in New York and how sort of, he was a little bit of a, not the most mature person in the world, right? Yet he was able to bring it in these, to these performances, and like, I don't know. I think that that's impressive.
Yeah, he was like, and again, forgive the modern comparisons, but kind of a Lindsay Lohan, and I'm trying to think of young guys that are jerks as young actors. Miles Teller has a bit of a reputation. I'm never going to work with him, so I don't worry about saying that. Gabe's going to stay silent, but and I don't blame him. You never know. But but yeah, I mean, no, he was, and in fact, I don't know if you ever heard this story, but I read that he met Bogart before Bogart passed away, and Bogart was trying to be nice and like trying to engage him in conversation, and Dean was just kind of that stick up his ass, not even looking at him, no eye contact stuff. And finally, Bogart grabbed him by the lapels and totally went classic Bogart. It was like, look, you little punk. When I talk to you, you look at me, and don't you ignore me. I'm trying to be a good guy, but fuck you if you can't handle it. He throw him away and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I can see Bogart.
Yeah, totally. Fantastic. I mean, the other side of this is there was I don't have the names in front of me, but there was a play that he was in that was headed to Broadway. It was it was opening out of town, and he was just being a petulant dick about it, right? He was like in rehearsals, he would just say that the script was shit and throw it down and walk out, and one of the actors was the lead actor was really distinguished older actor, a Broadway actor who, the first time Dean did this, the director went out and was like, "Hey, this guy's like the real deal, and you can't act like this unprofessionally, And Dean's like, "Okay." They go back inside. James Dean does the exact same thing again. He just gets frustrated with the script, yells about it and throws it down. And the director's like, I gotta fire this guy, right? And the older distinguished actor, who this would be a better story if I'd written down his name, pulled the director aside and was like, you know what? I've seen this kid on television. He's got something. He's there's talent there. You should just go with this because we're because we're going to get something interesting out of it, which I thought was interesting that the other actor valued the interesting thing that James Dean was bringing performance wise over the professionalism.
Last week we were talking about Nick Adams being in the movie No Time for Sergeants, and Nick Adams was obviously part of James Dean's crowd. Of course, Dennis Hopper.
Yeah,
in the 50s was also
because he was also in Giant, right? And Rebel Without a Cause, right?
Yep. So it's kind of and again, I mean, it's this early rock and roll, it's that Elvis attitude, and you could, I always felt, there's,
and this is really pre-rock and roll, though. I mean, this is like 1953. It's really
right about that.
Jazz is what they're listeling to.
Well, that's true, and in fact, they're like listening to a jazz version of Unforgettable, kind of a jazzier up tempo version of Unforgettable when they're dancing and Dean is trying to seduce Betsy Palmer. I'm such a Betsy Palmer fan, and I hope
So what are you, Betsy? What are you a fan of her from?
Honestly, it is this like Mr. Roberts. I mean, she's gorgeous, and in fact, I won't deny it. It is purely her physical traits, but also she was really incredibly great in Mr. Roberts, cutting down Jack Lemmon, as she did. And then, of course, great surprise when she's a scream queen, 20 years later in the first Friday the 13th movie.
Right. And I think that's probably what a lot of people would know her from now, as the mother of Jason Voorhees in the first Friday the 13th. And I think that she's briefly in the second one. Which is kind of funny. I mean, supposedly she was not too crazy about being known as that, but I think that she embraced it later in life with supposedly she was also like a reporter on the early Today show and called the Today Girl.
If you watch Buzzer, the game show network, and those black and white early 60s shows, she's on I've Got a Secret and What's My Line, but I've Got a Secret and To Tell the Truth, and shows like that. And also, as we are pulp and noir fans, I love this scene when James is looking at the photo of her, and it's like, hey, what's going on here? And she's like, yeah, I post for a cover of a pulp magazine.
Right.
And she really, in this show, is so dressed like she just stepped out of a Robert McGinnis cover.
Right. Well, and she's supposed to be playing a fashion model in this, so I mean that's part of it. But she definitely looks like somebody from a Robert McGinnis type pulp cover. I think that and she's actually quite good in this. Like it's she's really good. The older actor in this, Walter Hampton, was he was apparently a really distinguished Broadway actor who had been, he was like the only actor apart from Maurice Evans, who we, mentioned last week as the producer of the, Broadway version of No Time for Sergeants, but and also Ape Talk. But
Dr. Zayas, yes, indeed.
Yes, apart from Maurice Evans, this actor, Walter Hampton, is the only actor to play Hamlet on Broadway 3 times, right?
Wow.
Like, he was a super distinguished actor on Broadway, doesn't have a ton of credits for films and stuff. I mean, later in his life, he was in Sabrina and, Is he
the father in Sabrina?
It's like, I'm trying to remember. Like, I'm not sure, but it's the Billy Wilder movie.
I'm definitely going to look that up as we're talking.
His last big performance Broadway role was in Arthur Miller's The Crucible.
Oh, wow.
But and he's also in All About Eve. But and then, like, by this time, when he's elderly, he starts taking these TV roles, and he has a handful of TV credits as well. But this would be somebody who was, coming from the opposite end of the universe from James Dean, who's, a young actor who's enamored with Brando and the actor studio and all that sort of stuff. But they work well together. And I think that as opposed to the Tales of Tomorrow, this actually is a really well-directed episode as well. Both the way the camera is used and just the way that the performances are dealt with. The director is this guy, John Pizer, who really, he's another guy who didn't really go on to anything beyond a TV directing career, but he also, he worked till 1985. Like, one of his last credits is, like Chips. And then, this show, I don't understand how he was directing the show. It was Ripley's Believe It or Not. He directed a couple episodes with with Jack Palance and but it wasn't really like a fiction show. I remember the show, but not well. So
can you imagine this guy? Like, man, I directed James Dean when he was young and all this stuff. I'm directing fucking Chips. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
All right,
John, we know you hate Chips, okay? Like, I don't. You inexplicably hate Chips more than all the other terrible shows that are almost exactly the same.
You cannot be more right. But no, like, even like inventive angles like this, I think were great little shots.
Just like that piece you were showing before, where we're over his shoulder and seeing the the photo, and we managed to move in and around them as they're dancing. It's like it's a more like aggressive, interesting a way to use the camera than the other show, which was from the same year. It really, where we're getting in there and we're getting in close to them and we're reading these performances and
This is what Lumet would talk about in terms of the difference of shooting at CBS versus NBC.
Right.
And it's something we discussed early on when we talked about KineScope, where NBC had a lot of static. They really took advantage of the multicam and take camera 1, take camera 2, and do the setups in between. Whereas CBS really did have flowing cameras that really did move around. And there just was more kinetic energy, I think, to a lot of the shooting.
Yeah.
CBS's live shows. And Lumet's like, these were the two different schools of philosophy that were happening in the early days. And he, like I said, Danger was one of his big shows.
And it's, I think CBS was, I guess just more like they were more technically capable at CBS, but it's also down to the people who made the thing. I mean, if you're not somebody who, you can have all the technology in the world, but if you're not inclined to use it, if you don't have the talent and just creative thoughtfulness to to be elegant in the way that you use the camera, you're still not going to get there. So, I mean, it's totally down to the people who made it.
I hope to read or talk to someone that could tell me differently. But again, I think because NBC was backed by RCA, they really let the technology do a lot of the work for them. Whereas I do think there was just more of an artistic thought at CBS in terms of moving around with the camera and really getting it. And again, I could be wrong.
I'm sure that that's also support from the kind of producers who were working there as well.
Sure.
I mean, because the one thing that you need in order to stage stuff better is time, because because it takes rehearsals and it takes blocking and it takes all those things that, if you don't have the time to do it, you can't do it. So you just end up training multiple cameras on something, and then you end up with in the modern day, so much of prestige TV is, just captured footage from multiple cameras that's awkwardly cut together later, which is very, as much as there's great content and a lot of, of this modern golden age of TV, there's also a lot of the filmmaking is not taken into consideration in the way that it should be, I think. And it's interesting looking at these two different shows where the same year, yes, they're two different networks, but just this one has a dramatically different approach. It has a kind of elegance and fluidity, the way that the story is told, both with the camera and the actors and the and the script, which is not brilliant, but it's interesting enough, and and carries the thing along, and and has a kind of dynamism to it that the Tales of Tomorrow episode does not.
I wanted to point out some of the character actors that also play support. Up top here, that's on the far left. That's Frank Marth, and if you know your Honeymooners, Frank Marth did several episodes of the Honeymooners, including my favorite, where Ralph finds the counterfeit suitcase full of money, and the gangsters come and they hold him up in the apartment, and it's Norton, Alice, and Ralph. And George Petrie, who's also in a million episodes, he's the shorter gangster, but Frank Marth is the big guy. And there's that one great scene where Marth is told to rough up Cramden in the bedroom, and you hear the punching, and Alice is screaming, and Norton is screaming, and Frank Marth comes out, and you think he won, and all of a sudden he falls face forward, and Ralph has the gun, and it's like, wow, Ralph beat the guy up. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's funny.
That was also the end of the live TV Casino Royale that we covered, right?
But also, second from the left, that's Andrew Duggan, and Andrew Duggan is a fantastic actor. You've seen him in a million things. He played Houlihan, Hot Lips Houlihan's father, on a great episode of MASH in the 80s. But he's, I believe he's in Lancer. I believe he's the Lancer father in that CBS Western that has been made popular again because of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, right.
But he was in Bourbon Street Blues, which, like 77 Sunset Strip and Hawaiian Eye and Surfside 6, was another one of those.
I think it's Bourbon Street Beat. Isn't it Bourbon Street Beat?
It is Bourbon Street Beat. Excuse me.
Sorry.
But yeah, Duggan. No. I want it right. Absolutely, man. But yeah, he's a really great character actor. He's been in a million movies, westerns, war movies, and stuff. And you can see, he plays the cop in this thing. And there he is. And that's the youngest I've ever seen him. And of course, Marth plays Betsy Palmer's boyfriend, having no suspicions that the terror that's about to happen and the upset to their lives. But I was really, when I saw that too, it's like, God, this thing is really filled with great, competent actors, top to bottom.
Absolutely,
And again, look at the contrast. We get Raw Steiger in Tales of Tomorrow and Raw Dean.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, again, the level of acting is definitely up. I did notice at least once or twice where it felt like Dean was almost breaking character. He wasn't speaking a couple times early on when he.
And there are some definite live TV sort of flubs in this. Absolutely. There's in that scene where the boyfriend comes in, Betsy Palmer is struggling to get out that he has a new job or that he got a new
Right.
job or something. And she says, you got a new law, it just, she stumbles over some of the lines.
Yeah.
But,
But again, that's what we look for.
Which is interesting, right? Like it's,
Absolutely.
it's more immediate. It's something different,
Absolutely.
And they couldn't go back and change it.
No. And then, going back to Tales of Tomorrow with Steiger, we will examine Marty, and that's going to be fun. But my personal favorite 50s performance of Steiger's, no surprise, being the boxing fan that I am, is The Harder They Fall.
Oh, yeah.
And you really get classic method actor Steiger rubbing up against classic old Hollywood Bogart. And these two incredible titans. It's like a boxing match. I mean,
Sure.
They are really circling each other with their different styles of acting. And it is so fascinating to watch. So, and of course, the Pawnbroker and
on the waterfront. On
the waterfront, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is I'm a massive Steiger fan. Steiger actually was the guest of honor one year at the Chicago Film Festival in the '90s when I would go, because our radio station was one of the main sponsors of the festival, so we always got free tickets and could go to all the big bell and whistle events and everything. So yeah, I got to see Steiger speak. And as much as we made fun of William Shatner's commentary of Incubus, Steiger would give him a run for the money in terms of, all right, I'm totally mesmerized by what he's saying. I have no idea what he's talking about, but by all means, Mr. Steiger, keep going.
Yeah, he, even more than William Shatner, he's one of these guys that just has struck me as completely nuts when he, or a guy that you have a hard time kind of honing in on what the hell he's ever talking about in interviews and stuff like that. And I don't know, there certainly was some interesting stuff in one of the books that I use for research, this oral history, The Box.
I know that book.
Sure. By Jeff Kisseloff. It's a oral history of TV through, basically from the earliest days up through 1961. And awesome. And there's some good stuff in there with Rod Steiger talking about just, what it was like to work in TV at this time and his struggles with it and stuff.
I don't know if the TV Academy spoke to him before he passed away.
I don't know if there's one or not. Well, when we look at Marty, we'll revisit that, and we'll go into a little more depth on Mr. Steiger.
No question. But yeah, again, unfortunately, these are two thinner examples of live TV, but we do want to represent these shows as well because they're interesting. In fact, God, you told me off the air, and I'm just going to mention it because I'm already fascinated by it. I'm only an hour into it, but there's this great podcast of Quentin Tarantino for 4 hours talking about public domain movies.
Right.
And
on Pure Cinema podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's great. And in fact, they recommend a couple YouTube sites, much like what we're doing in terms of finding videos that you can watch for free. And one of them, I think it's called the Pizza Deck.
Yeah.
And they've got episodes of another great early television show that I hope we will examine. And that's the television version of Suspense.
Yeah.
And Suspense was a massively successful radio show that started in the 40s and ran until on radio the early 60s, 1962. It was one of the last, or 61 is when, no, it was 62 because the last two radio shows CBS was running them were Suspense and yours truly, Johnny Dollar, a detective show.
Yeah.
And yeah, both of them by that point weren't even full 30-minute shows because you had 5-minute newscasts at the bottom of the hour. So they would be at the time, they'd start at 6, but then 6:25 they'd end. And and Suspense was also an early television show starting in the late 40s.
Yeah, we definitely should check that out. We do, it's a half-hour show as well, right? So, I think that's one where we could double up a couple episodes and just talk about Suspense, and that would be great. I mean, I think we're basically done with this, but next week we're going to talk about 12 Angry Men. One of the sort of classics of this era. So we'll talk about the live TV version. We'll talk about the movie version that Lumet directed. This is Reginald Rose's script that is so well thought of, and and the differences between the TV version and the the movie version are interesting, and there may be later movie versions of this. Is that correct?
Yes,
like in the 90s or something? And,
yes. You've got the original Franklin Schaffner directed television play.
Right.
Then you've got the movie that was Sidney Lumet's first theatrical film.
Yep.
And you've got the difference in casting in those. And then in the 90s, and we'll talk more about it next week, Showtime did a made-for-Showtime television movie that William Friedkin directed, and an entire great cast of great actors and familiar faces that aren't so great actors, but it kind of fit in the same way that the cast were formed for the original two productions. And all three are great to contrast. I've got personal stories because I knew one of the actors that was in the 90s one.
Cool.
And
I didn't realize it was Friedkin, so that's interesting. Those are all certainly interesting directors. So so that'll be fun to talk about. There's a lot to go into there, and all those actors, and and really something that is something that's interesting to look at across all those different forms of it.
It's a bottle show too, where especially the film both movie versions and the teleplay, pretty much everything happens in one room.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's basically a stage play, but but never really. I mean, I assume there were stage versions of it, but
I've found local Playhouse productions.
Right.
They videotaped them and they're on YouTube as well.
Right.
No, it's a great story. And really, I'm sorry that there isn't a free version of the film on YouTube. I would seek it out.
Yeah.
Because, there's enough of a difference in that. And then also, I'm reasonably certain that the 90s version is on Tubi, if not also on YouTube.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, we'll do our best to we kind of dropped the ball this week. We're sorry, everybody, that we didn't give you more notice in terms of watching a couple of these examples, but it's James Dean.
Yeah, and I mean, we both of us were a little bit busy this week, but one place that you could, if you happen to have Criterion Channel, the 12 Angry Men film is available should be available on there. So definitely check these out. At least check out the live TV version, which should be on YouTube.
So it's kind of perfect. 2 of us angry men talking about 12 more angry men.
Yeah, well, 10 more angry men. Yeah.
Well, we're 14.
There's 2 of us, and so there's 12. Look, we don't know how many guests we're going to have next week. I'm not doing this math. Okay, we should finish.
All right, thanks a lot for watching. Join us next Thursday for another episode of KineScope. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.